Good evening and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. And this evening, I am delighted to be joined by Paul Gitsham, and Paul is going to be talking about his latest book and standalone, The Aftermath. Hi, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Karen. Great. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy doing UK CBC stuff.
Yeah, looking at when I was doing my sort of research on, I imagine that the amount of books that you've written, you've been on a few times. This is probably not the first time.
I have. Yeah, 2 or 3. The Warren Jones books have been on there, at least the last 2, if I recall. And I think I may even took part in one of the quizzes, but we'll skim over that because it wasn't.
Well, there's another one.
Well, it was a fun experience. It wasn't necessarily a happy experience, shall we say.
Well, there's one this weekend. So there's the big crime quiz of the year.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
On Sunday at 7, I believe. So
I think so.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to that.
I think I might actually be in a pub quiz, unfortunately. So,
you can always watch it afterwards.
Yeah.
So, would you like to introduce yourself and your book for all your books? Plural.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So my name's Paul Gitsham. I am known up to recently as the writer of the D.C. Warren Jones series of books. You can sort of see them behind me there. I wrote 9 full lengths and then 4 shorter novellas, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. But my latest book is my first standalone, The Aftermath, and not only that, it's also my first domestic thriller. So it's a little bit different to what people are expecting. Not as much police procedure. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, people have been very pleased, very kind, and they said they've enjoyed it as much as my Warren Jones books, including long-term Warren Jones fans who said, I wasn't quite sure, but I picked it up and now I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I think, that's as good a praise as you can get. So this came out in October.
Yeah.
And it's available in paperback, as you can see, but also available on Kindle. And it is currently 99 pence on Kindle in the UK at the moment for a limited period. It's also available on other platforms, but I'm pushing it on the Kindle for 99p. And my wife and I have been pushing it since July, when my wife and I can be seen traipsing around wearing these T-shirts, which includes on the back, I'm not going to turn around because I'm plugged in, the release date. So I also put some obviously photographs of us in front of landmarks under the hashtag no budget marketing, and also we ran a series on the run up to the publication of Shed Sunday, where my wife and I would be pictured wearing our T-shirts in front of various sheds. So pretty much one for the Dull Men's Club, I think, that on Facebook. But we had a lot of fun, and some friends generously donated their sheds, and we also snuck into B&Q and took a few photographs before the security asked us to leave. Obviously that ties in with the cover image, which is of a shed on fire, which I'm sure we'll talk about why that is relevant later on.
Indeed. So it was, I think I really enjoyed it. It's very fast paced, very
Thank you.
Very sort of gripping, and actually I think when I was again doing my research and reading other people's reviews as well, is that I felt that you don't really know where you are with the book. You don't really know who you can trust, which I always think is really good. And I think a domestic thriller as well, that's generally, you sort of get to know the characters and you think you know them, and you think you're going along all right, and then all of a sudden something happens and you think, I didn't know them at all, did I?
Yeah, it's the trickle, isn't it? That's what I love about domestic thrillers.
Yeah.
Because I didn't just decide I'm going to write a domestic thriller. I've been reading them for years and I love them. I really do. And obviously I read a lot of police procedure, and that's what I'm best known for. But I adore domestic thrillers, and it's the trickle. You think you know the character, and then there's a little bombshell. It's like, I didn't know. It turns your thoughts, And I just love that. I really, really enjoy that. And so, yeah, domestic thrillers are one of my sort of go-tos alongside Police Procedures. Yeah, I think, people like Lisa Hall, who I'm a huge fan of, and she very generously gave me a quote for the front cover. Also, people like C.L. Taylor. She's another great one. Mark Edwards. They do wonderful sort of domestic kind of thrillers where it's Kate Abdullah. She's
so many. So many.
Yeah.
So we'll actually, do you want to just give us a brief synopsis of The Aftermath?
Yes,
the shed picture on the front cover is very important to the story without giving any spoilers.
Extremely important, yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, it is literally the opening. So essentially what happens is a man called Seamus Monaghan. He's been away for a business trip. He comes home, can't find his wife, and he notices the garden shed's on fire. And when he gets there, he realizes that his wife's in there. I mean, that is the opening. It is literally the opening with the shed's on fire. He realizes that his wife, Carol, is in the shed. And so what we see is essentially almost like three kind of threads, or 2.5 threads. So we have the time when the shed takes place, okay, the fire. And we see the immediate fallout from that, which is obviously they want to know, well, why? Oops, sorry. I was just explaining. I bought some wonderful headphones to help me with tutoring, and they find that my hat doesn't fit very terribly well when I'm wearing these. I'm gonna have to think about that. So we have these. We find out, well, what happened. So the police are interested, obviously, to know, was it a suicide? Did she kill herself? Was there foul play involved? As we find out, obviously, the characters, this is when we start to see perhaps the things they would have liked to have kept quiet from the police. Then interspersed with that, we've got today's story, which is 3 years on. Seamus is trying to move on. He's engaged. He's expecting twins. He wants to move on with his life, but the fire just won't let him go. We have a mysterious woman who gets run over at night in the middle of a storm. And who's she? What's she got to do with this? And then as the book progresses, we do have flashbacks. It was important to me that we got to know Carol. I don't know, I'm sure many listeners are familiar with the phrase fridging, which is basically, it was coined after, I believe it was a Green Lantern comic book, where the opening panels were the Green Lantern finding his girlfriend dead in a fridge. Now, this is the thing. We knew nothing about this girlfriend. We never learned anything about this girlfriend. She was just the catalyst for the Green Lantern to go do his hero stuff and get revenge and all that sort of thing. And it's a trope we see often. And I thought, I don't want anyone to do that. I think we need to get to know Carol. So during the course of the book, we see them. We see how Carol, we meet her from when they get married. We see their relationship progressing. We see the difficulties that she's starting to have, and perhaps has given us some ideas about why she's chosen to take this route. And I feel towards the end of the book, we get to know Carol. I mean, she dies on page 1, but we get to know her. And actually, I quite like her. I think she'd probably be a bit of a handful to live with. But you know what? I grew to like her. And I think that's important. I think we have to know who this woman was and why it's so devastating. And so the taglines of the book, which is across top the cover, is the fire, the fallout, the aftermath. And so the aftermath is that 3 years later, where still this tragic event is reverberating.
Because that must have been, when I was reading it, and you have the different sort of perspectives and the different stories going on at the same time, I was thinking, how did you write this? You know, that's always like, unfortunately, that's my reviewer's head on when I'm reading. I always think, did you write this? You know, did you write it sort of linear? Did you write it, one bit at a time and then mesh them together?
I write out a sequence. I've discussed this before, and I haven't really changed my writing style since Warren Jones, which is whereby I don't do that much planning. I don't do much plotting. I have a rough idea what I want. I obviously have a big concept that has sparked me to write the book. But then what I tend to do is I tend to write out a sequence. I write as the scenes come to me, and then I put them together towards the end. And in some respects, that worked quite nicely for this book, because what it actually meant was that if I had been writing, let's say, one of the flashback scenes, I kind of get into the groove of that flashback that time, and actually then thought, well, okay, well, I'll actually write two or three more scenes that are kind of in this area, and then those scenes themselves will actually be dispersed in the book, but I'll kind of write them in one big go, because the muse is there and I'm writing. So it was written out of sequence, but what I found was that with the different timelines was often I find I'd write 2 or 3 sections from each contemporaneous time period, but then they will be slotted together in the correct order. And each time you do it, it can be a little bit squeaky bum towards the end, because you think, well, are they going to fit in? Not too many difficulties this time. I mean, I've had some howlers with the Warren Jones ones in the past, where I've realised that they've been enthusiastically discussing a piece of forensic evidence that they haven't actually discovered yet, and I've had to rearrange those chapters. I've always fixed it, but you notice it in the about 3/4 of the way through. I take some time out and start putting things into order, a rough timeline, rough order, because then I can see what the gaps are. Right, what do I need to write here? And also see, is there anything I need to change? Or is there anything I need to cut? I could cut those 2 or 3 lines from there and put them into that earlier bit, because that's better. I start to almost edit about 3/4 of the way through.
You're almost like plotting and editing at the same time in a way. So you just sort of get it out of your head, and then once it's on the page, then you start to put it into the order that you want it in.
Absolutely. I mean, I've always said, actually, we have this debate about plotters and pantsers, and I know there are extremes. So supposedly Jeffrey Deaver apparently writes a 300-page outline before he writes a 600-page book. I know Laura Shepherd Robinson's a very, very big plotter as well. Lee Child famously claims literally not to know what's going on in the next page, and just writes and sees as it comes. But then the rest of us fall into the middle. And I think actually I probably, if you were to look at my notes, because I make notes as I go along, I have a separate document open, and the ideas come, you'd be writing a scene, you think, ooh, in that case, then maybe I need to put this in. And I just take a moment, write it up in the comments, and then carry on. If you look at that common document at the end, there's probably about as much planning and plotting as many other writers. It's just that the time at which we've done it is different.
Yeah.
So we plot, but in different ways, and in some ways are more visible than others. I think that's the fairest way to put it.
Yeah, definitely. And how sort of different was it to sort of writing the DCI Warren Jones series? Because obviously you said you'd written 13 books, 9 big ones and 4 smaller ones.
Couple of short stories for free, by the way, on my website. Just thought I'd push that in there. By all means, have a look. Just go and download paulgitsham.com. But sorry, yes, carry on.
No, that's fine. No, that's no problem. But sorry, I was going to, so how, because obviously you really knew him, I imagine, from the end, you've been writing him for lots of years. So how different was it? And was it more of a scary process going into a standalone?
Interesting whether you use the word scary. I don't know whether scary is the right word. Exciting, there's possibly a better word, but simply because I did get to write some new characters, which obviously I was doing every Warren Jones book, because although I had the team that stayed the same, and they do develop, they evolve over the books, but I'd obviously be bringing in all of the next characters for that book. I always enjoyed that. I always enjoyed hate making up names, but I love writing characters. So that was incredibly exciting. But what was fun, though, was, to be fair, was that when you write a long-standing series, you get to know the characters, and the characters there become expectations of those characters, things they wouldn't do. And I don't want to use the phrase limiting. It's not. Actually, I actually work better with limits. I prefer to work inside a box which is closely defined. And the Warren Jones books allowed me to do that because there were certain things that Warren would never do, his wife would never do, etc.
Yeah.
Things I'd said would happen in the series. And then I'm inside the box that is police procedure, because these are Warren Jones books are realistic police procedurals. As best I can, and obviously with the odd bit of artistic license to help the story flow, it follows procedure. So there are things he wouldn't do. And I've always said one of the great things about writing a British police procedure is that we don't have guns. No. Warren Jones cannot solve a problem by running in with a gun in his hand, because we don't. No. British police don't have guns. Okay, detectives are not armed. It's incredibly rare, if it wasn't heard of, that a detective would be a firearms officer. They're two separate skill sets. Whereas in some American books, I mean, they can solve that problem that way. So I like those constraints. But when you start to write a standalone, a lot of those bets are all off. The police, it's not a police procedural, but there are police in it, and there is police procedure, because they're solving a crime or investigating an occurrence. And I have stuck with the rules. I mean, they don't run around with guns or anything like that. In that sense, it's entirely realistic. But the characters are fresh. And because it's a domestic standalone, they actually focus from the character's perspective, the victims, the suspects, the witnesses. The police, towards the beginning, are deliberately only broad brushstrokes, because I don't want the readers to be thinking too much from their perspective. The way I describe it is unlike the Warren Jones series, where if there's an interview, we're sitting on the same side of the table as the police.
Yeah.
For this, we're sitting on the other side of the table, and they're looking at the police, who are asking them questions, and they're thinking, why are they asking me that? Why do they not believe me? Surely they don't think, oh, do they know this? And so we're actually seeing it from the opposite side of the table, while as the detectives remain somewhat inscrutable. Towards the end of the book, obviously, as we get into his was Denmark, we do get to know the detectives a bit better. But that was a very different way of writing, and I thoroughly enjoyed that, because civilians act differently to police officers. It's obviously.
I guess I hadn't thought about that when I was reading it, and I was thinking about like the perspective of the sort of domestic is very much about the normal people, isn't it? It's about the normal lives, the normal what goes on behind closed doors, and whereas like the detectives are much more, process orientated, and you don't, they have limits, because they can't just, like you say, do what they want.
Exactly. And I can present. So ironically, I don't know if you know any of the history of how the book was written, but when the very first draft was done, I sought out some professional advice to see what people thought of it. And I was told, this is a really good police procedural. It's a really good thriller. We like the characters. What would you like it to be? Police procedural thriller. One or the other.
Yeah.
Now, my first thought was, oh, for goodness sake, so we're all pigeonholed into writing,
Yeah.
But I then thought, no, that's really interesting. So what I did was, it was daunting at first. I thought I'd have to rewrite everything, and it turns out I didn't. Primarily, I just went into things like interview scenes, and like I said, turned the table around,
twisted it round, yeah.
And that was really good fun. And what also meant just that I cut a load of stuff, because I had scenes where the police were doing some procedure, where they were tracking down receipts and all the usual sort of stuff we expected.
Yeah.
Actually, what they could do is, if we flip it this way around, the person being interviewed, sitting in the interview room, in comes the police officer and say, right, we've shown that you did X, Y. They're having to show the process. That's the difference. The police and leave them wondering how the police figure that out. But the fact that I'd actually written those scenes initially probably means it holds together a bit better, actually, because even though it's not on the page, I'd actually initially thought out how would the police find out that information. So in many ways, the police procedure is actually there. It's just it never made it onto the page, which I think is actually not a bad way of writing these things. Something to consider, I think.
And I guess it would be impossible for you to completely remove that, because obviously that's the way you've written for a length of time. So you're not going to be able to sort of like completely clear that out of your brain and go, right, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. Because it's
a friend of mine, a good friend of mine who he said when he reviewed it for me very kindly, and then we obviously had a chat generally, and he said, oh yeah, he says, I could tell you write police procedures. He says that's very clear to me. He says that I can see the evidence, which I thought was good. I mean, that's what I want. I want it to be realistic, even if it's not actually on the page. It's there, it's in the head, it's been thought out.
But it gives it another spin as well, doesn't it? It gives it a different, edge to other domestic. Because I think that's the thing, isn't it? What's important about all books is that they're always going to be different, even if it's the same topic. And if you've got, that sort of police procedural knowledge, even if it's not completely about it, it's still going to make the book different.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. And this is no way criticism of any of my peers, far from it. Because the other opposite way of doing it is just saying almost like a shopping list of, well, I need this to happen, this to happen, this to happen. So this takes place, and then and it can occasionally the reader wondering, well, how did the police find that out? It seems a bit convenient that they knew that. Whether people think that or not about me, I wouldn't want to say, but I like to think that there's no sort of leaps of, oh, come on, how could the police possibly know that? Actually, hopefully, that all seems plausible. It all seems like, oh yeah, the police can find out.
No, I think that was the case. I think it, as you went through, it was quite. Excuse me. Oh dear. You sort of knew where they were getting it from. Yeah, thanks.
Just because we're online doesn't mean I haven't got my manners.
So let's talk about characters a bit, because you've obviously got the two brothers, and then you've got Carol, and then you've got Andrea, who was Carol's best friend. So they're all quite a tight-knit group. And we find out about them in the various periods across the book, which is really interesting, because their lives change quite dramatically, obviously, with Seamus losing Carol, and then I won't give too much away, because I don't want to do spoilers. There's a trouble with thrillers and books, so you can't give away spoilers. But basically, their lives change. They all keep together, and So how did those characters come about when you sort of had the idea? Did they sort of come fully formed, or did they sort of develop as you wrote?
To a degree, yeah, they did come fully formed. And I'll tell you why. I mean, in many ways, I was saying, you talk about the themes in your book. And one of the themes, I think, is the brotherly love. There's Seamus and Dominic. I mean, so this doesn't give much away, but basically, Seamus and Dominic were orphaned when they were small children. Dominic's the older brother by 3 years. And he took it upon himself to look after his younger brother. Yeah. And so he has done. He's an extremely successful businessman in his own right. But he's always looked out for Seamus. And we do see some of the stupid things that Seamus has done over the years that Dominic's fixed for him, sort of thing. And I love that. I love that idea of a young Dominic who's only about 8 years old, just basically stepping up and saying, well, mum and dad have gone, so I've got to be his father, and which I think is lovely. I mean, it reminds me a bit of that. I mean, it shows me age. It's one of the earliest comic reliefs where Billy Connor, I think it was out there filming in Africa. And there was this young boy, and he was looking after his 2-year-old brother, and he was just basically, I'm all he's got. And that's always resonated with me, very, very emotional. That. And I thought, there is that, even in somewhat less extreme circumstances, that happens. But also, these guys all met at university. And I'm fortunate enough to have a close group of friends who I met at university. We just had 25-year anniversary of our graduation, and we got together again, and we get together each year, once a year. We're a bit scattered now, and it unfortunately is usually only once a year, but we get together. We hire a house, or we used to go to Centre Parks, and then it's a lot of money. And everything's changed. People have got families, new partners. We've now got there's lots of spouses who weren't never went to university with us, obviously, and have met since, but then they're now part of the group. And I loved that we've all evolved. We're well into our 40s now. And we're the next big milestone is going to be 50. When we've had illnesses, we've had all the sort of stuff we grow with.
Yeah.
And I love that. And my wife, who I met since university, she always says, you'll revert when you're back together.
Yeah.
It's the same old jokes we were telling when we were in our 20s, and occasionally have to explain to baffled spouses what that one's about. In jokes and stuff. And I love that. I loved the way we've evolved, and I wanted to capture some of that. I think that sort of relationship is great. That one where a group of people are just basically growing all together, whether they're these guys all happen to be in close proximity to each other, so obviously they're seeing each other regularly. Others, but it doesn't matter. You can have groups that are disparate, and you're still growing together because you're all sharing the same life milestones, even if you're not exactly there together. And I just love that. I really wanted to get that in, and because of that, I think also there's group dynamics. There's this. Fortunately, my friendship group isn't any of the drama this will have, but there are. There are history, drama. There are, dare I say, secrets that are not spoken about, and I think that to me is an ideal setting for a domestic thriller.
Yeah,
because you get, as you see, going back to the trickle idea.
Definitely, and I think those secrets, without giving too much away, of sort of very, if they were just all sort of, they all, they didn't have those sorts of secrets, and that makes the book even more, page turning. You want to find out what happened and why they do this and why that is. So what was the most difficult part about writing this book?
To be honest, here's the thing. It sounds really bad. It was actually quite an easy book to write, or at least the first draft was. I wrote it in 6 weeks, which for me is ridiculous. Yeah, what happened was basically I'd finished the latest Warren Jones. I finished that almost a year before the contract, which that always amazed a lot of my friends. It just did. Weberlies just wrote itself really nicely, and so I actually had a several months spare. And so rather than give that to my publisher, who would immediately, we can publish it earlier and all that sort of stuff. You give them what they need, not what they want. I had this gap, and I thought, I've got all these other ideas kicking around. This story, I knew there was no way I could shoehorn into Warren Jones. It just wouldn't fit. I'd have to change it so much it wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, I'm going to have a go. And I wrote it about 6 weeks. I gave myself a deadline. I said I wanted to get the first draft done before we got married in the summer. That would be just useful. I did about 2 or 3 days before we got married. I kind of finished the end. Now that was a very rough draft, and that's the one that had a load more police procedure in. So then I obviously had to work on it over the summer and that. But actually, no, it flowed fairly well. Once I got the idea and once I started to see where it was going, actually, it wasn't that difficult. The trickiness was the same trickiness you have with every book. It's where you want to try and hide things in plain sight. It was the technical craft of the writing, hiding stuff, making sure that you don't give the game away too soon. Then cutting your darlings a bit, where you've got scenes where you just think, actually, I like that scene. I loved writing it, but I'm probably not good to keep it in the book. It doesn't add anything, or maybe it contradicts other stuff. So the short answer is it was relatively easy to write.
Yeah. 6 weeks is pretty amazing, really. I mean, how long did it take you to write? How long does it normally take you to write the Warren Jones?
Oh, several months. I mean, it's from. I mean, obviously, by not plotting much beforehand, in some respects, I don't do myself any favors in that, because I actually have to. I'm lucky. I don't have to chop, 30,000 words, and I've never had that. I do know people who've gone off in a completely wrong route and they just throw stuff. Never had that, thank goodness. But there are times when you have to stop and say, well, hang on a second, where on earth are you going? You're going right down a blind alley here, potentially. And and which actually, to me, is actually, again, going back to those idea of constraints. If I've inadvertently boxed myself into a corner, I actually quite like it, because it often makes me more creative. Because my last option is always dial it back, delete it, and go a different way.
Right.
I'm stubborn. I will try and fight my way out of that corner I give myself first.
Yeah.
And what I feel is that makes you really creative. I mean, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you do have to edit it out. But I've always been one for, let's try and fight my way out of this first before I take the easy route. So I enjoy doing writing that way, and so that does mean things tend to be slower when you're writing. Plus, the Warren Jones books were longer. I mean, they're the police procedures could be a good bit longer, about 120,000 words or so. This one's 70 odd. It's very different, and it was interesting. The cut in the police procedure dropped the word count noticeably. Plus, not being a series, I don't have a lot of backstory to slip in and explain.
Because I guess when you've done several as well, like you have, that must be a challenge as well, is trying to remember everything they did 12 books ago or 6 books ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess that freedom you probably had in writing this one was like, well, I can just do what I like.
Well, there is freedom. This is it. Yeah, there's no history. There is no history that exists before this book.
No.
Whatever history is there has been put into this book. It was written for this book, and that does make things easier. It has to be said, because there are times in a Warren Jones book where potentially I could have had Warren do this. I think, well, actually, no, because we did establish he probably wouldn't ever do that. So that leaves me.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't really go back and do that. Which was never a massive thing, but it does change the way you plot. But like I said, I like working with constraints, so actually that just, again, maybe more creative, I think.
With this book, was it different? Because I guess obviously you've been writing for a while now, so your research, I guess, but I guess with a police procedural, the research aspect is more heavy going than it is with with a domestic thriller.
It can be, yeah. I mean, you've got to try and keep up to date with things like changing legislation. The Warren Jones books were typically running 2 or 3 years behind their actual publication date. So and that was just a quirk when the series started. I wrote that book in 2011. It didn't hit the shelves 2014, and then the next 2 books actually took place in Warren's first year. So in fact, I was running right behind, and I was doing tricks and some of the other ones to try and bring myself forward a little bit.
Yeah.
But it does mean that you have a good idea, and then you have to go and check that was a thing back then. Yeah. So changing.
Yeah.
Double jeopardy is a good one. I mean, I was looking at that the other day, and double jeopardy. So the double jeopardy law, which existed obviously for hundreds of years, which was that you can never be tried for the same crime twice.
Yeah.
That was eventually abolished around about 2006. It depends on when you look at the date. And so you'd have to actually look at a book and say, well, hang on a second, was double jeopardy still a thing? Was it, or were they no longer, or had double jeopardy being abolished? So that can obviously have a huge impact on some books.
Yeah.
The idea that you what they're going to do, they catch this person who was acquitted, but double jeopardy means that they can't be tried again, or it does mean that suddenly there is the possibility of appealing against the original acquittal. So that's a good one. The other one as well is the moving nature of things like forensic science,
like the sort of technology and things moving.
Exactly. Now my background is I'm a molecular biologist, is my background before I became a science teacher and tutor, and so I'm very comfortable with the science, but dates is the interesting thing. I mean, yes, 1984, Alec Jeffreys discovered DNA profiling. It wasn't used till 1985, and it wasn't a criminal case as such. Colin Pitchfork is obviously the big headline use of that But actually, they'd used it in a they'd done a test case with a it was an immigration case where a young man needed to prove that he was actually the son of this woman, and that was the first time it actually went into court. But the technology, whilst it theoretically existed, it was very crude. I mean, you needed large amounts of biological samples, so that limited its use. It was incredibly expensive, very time-consuming. Although it was accepted as evidence in the court, juries were still a bit flummoxed by it. Witness O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
I mean, they completely bamboozled the jury on that one. I mean, it was absolute claptrap. That was a positive DNA match. They've also increased the necessity. Yeah. And then they have all the new things come in, like familial DNA, where basically they look on the database and they find, right, okay, our suspect's not on the DNA database, but somebody who is either his brother, his cousin, or his father is on there. Okay, well, let's see who that match is.
Yeah.
Oh, hello. They're related to this particular toe rag who's already got form. So we can't prove anything at the moment, but we should go and have a chat with this person and see if we can get a blood sample, and then we can definitively look. But again, that didn't come in until a bit later. And so that's where the research comes in. It's often dates. Dates are what can trip you up, because you're enthusiastically talking about and doing a DNA test. You think, hang on a minute, they couldn't do that in 1992. The technology... You know, and they wouldn't have got the funding for it. They said, no way, too expensive.
I imagine, I was going to say, imagine it was really, really expensive and just not accessible. It wasn't going to be like your sort of local. It's probably, might have been used in, I guess, high profile cases to start with. But
absolutely. And time as well. I mean, the labs in America in particular is a real issue with some, because everything's done on the state level and the local level. There's no joined up system in the US. They have a real problem with that. 20,000 law enforcement units, and they don't talk to each other very well. That's why it's a great place for serial killers. So they in the US, in the UK, we're much better joined up, but still, there's backlog. There is backlog in some of these labs. Now, can you jump a queue? Apparently, some forces have a policy whereby each major incident is allowed 4 or 5 situations where they can jump a queue. So they can say, right, these are your most priority ones. We'll allow you to get those done quickly, but you can only do it a few times per case, because otherwise the budget spirals out of control. I don't know whether that's the case in all forces, but that certainly has been practiced in some. That's an interesting thing. So you've got to use that wisely. And actually, that's great because it can add narrative tension. In theory, on using modern technology, you can get a DNA profile back in a few hours if you rush it. But you've got to get the sample to the lab. You've got to get to the front of the queue. They've got to run it. And so, is the lab running 24 hours? Then they've got to send you the results with the interpretation.
Yeah.
So how long will it take? Is it a bank holiday weekend?
Yeah.
Well, these are all great narrative devices, though, because you can essentially say, well, okay, I need this to be done in 3 days, not 1 day. 1 day's too quick for the bucket and work.
Yeah.
A week would be too slow. I want it done in 3 days. And so then you can perhaps fudge it and say, right, well, okay.
Yeah.
There's a backlog, etc. You can use all these reasons, so it takes as long as you need it to take. Basically.
You can play with it in that respect of having that. So it gives you that again, like that freedom to be able to do what you want to do with the story, rather than the story, saying, well, it's that would always be back in 24 hours, and that wouldn't be the case. Sort of thing.
Well, supposedly they identified Bin Laden by DNA in 24 hours, and I remember the time it happened. A load of us going, whoa, that's technology we don't have access to in the lab. I've since found out that apparently they've done a lot of the groundwork beforehand. They got the samples and everything from the close relatives. They were ready to go. As soon as they had a sample, they could do something with it. And the match they used, was quite quick. Yeah, quite quick technology. But still, that time frame raised a few eyebrows with people who routinely use DNA in the lab. And that was quick going. They didn't hang about.
But then I guess that was probably the highest level that you get.
Oh yeah, yeah. Rumor had it may even have been done in the field with handheld technology. I don't know if that's true or not. They ain't going to admit to that. And theoretically, the principle's there, but whether it will be done. I mean, now though they could take your fingerprint in the field. I even saw it on, I think it's 24 Hours of Police Custody at night, or one of the.
Oh really? Yeah.
Yeah, the live scan, which is what they've been using in the police station for a while now. When you go in now, you don't get ink put on your fingers. You put your fingers on a plate, and it scans with a high resolution scanner. They now have a handheld version of one of those that will do it, and I guess probably Bluetooth to a mobile phone and sends it back and scans the system. So the technology is always advancing, but it's always useful to have that. But again, if that's too quick, well, how many of these toys does your average cash-strapped police force have?
Yeah.
How likely is it that somebody's going to have one to hand? So again, you can always work your way around that.
Yeah. I guess that's the nice thing, isn't it? Is that it's that workaround that you said, that you can have that, gives you that sort of, the flexibility in your writing.
And it's fun.
The sort of the pacing is really interesting. I guess, again, you're saying about the pacing. Is that very different in your police procedural to this sort of book, which is very fast paced?
This one probably is a bit faster paced than some of the police procedures. And that, again, is down to the procedure. The Warren Jones one, the pace, obviously, like all books, varies as you go through the book. There are the action scenes, which are very quick. There are other scenes which are less quick. And a lot of pacing comes down to description. Now, because my police procedures are quite detailed, I used to take a fair bit of time quite over doing some of the procedures. You don't want to go too much, obviously, and you need a sharp editor to come back and say, look seriously, I know that's good and that's interesting, but it's interesting to 5% of your readers. No, 95% are going to glaze over. You need that honest appraisal and feedback from people.
Yeah.
This one, having less police procedure, does mean that they didn't have that slowing down parts of it.
Yeah.
It was noticeable, and I was very brutal on the word limit here. I really cutting it down.
Yeah.
And I always try and have a twist at the end of a chapter. Because I think you should. I think I for those who are not so familiar with writing, I tend to have a chapter with multiple scenes in it. I have scene breaks.
Yeah.
So I'm not doing 2-page chapters with a twist at the end of each one, which some thriller writers do.
Yeah.
But actually, that can get a little tiresome, a little bit. I'm not going to mention any names because it's disrespectful, but there's a couple of prominent thriller writers who have been criticised for that. Oh, get to the end of the chapter, there's another twist, and you think, no. The chapter has to end on some significance. I think would be the best phrase. That could be a twist, or it could be they've just found something really interesting that is going to be relevant later on, and that affects the pacing. I try and have one of those at the end of each chapter. The scene breaks may have them, but they will be less. And in fact, when I actually it's another weird thing I do, which apparently very few people do. I write it out. And obviously I have all my scenes and I have scene breaks between them. And then with a red pen, when I'm doing my first round edits, then I decided which of those scene breaks should be chapter breaks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I try not to, I try to keep the chapters broadly at the same length. So it might be that, there's a really short chapter. So, I'm going to merge the next one and we'll just make it a longer chapter and scene breaks. But no, they vary a bit in length. I mean, I do a really weird, freaky thing. I've done it since I was a kid, whereby I get to the end of a chapter, look at the page number, and divide by the number of chapters to work out the average page count per chapter. Don't ask me why I do that. I think it was just a way of practicing mental arithmetic.
I was going to say that is a mathematical brain that does not even commute in my non-mathematical brain.
It's weird, but I do it anyway. Michael Connolly is accurate to within half a page of each chapter length. I mean,
really,
they are, and I think it's because he's actually a journalist was how he started.
Yeah.
And of course, they're used to writing copy to a particular length. Other writers, I was reading one the other day, and there was a chapter that was 3 lines long, and followed by and that's fine. It's certainly not a criticism, it's a stylistic choice. And it worked really well in this book. For me, I try to get the chapters broadly the same length, but I mean, they're never going to be like Michael Connolly's. And the fact is, I mean, you think about it, in terms of word count, that has to be accurate to be plus or minus 200 words if you're going to get a chapter. And I don't know how he does it, because it doesn't feel like chapters are rushed or laboured.
No, it's just maybe
they just seem to naturally be that length.
But like
and
you said, if he was
do that many scene breaks.
Maybe he's just so used to writing like that. That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
I often look on Scrivener, which is the package I use for writing now, and then see how many words are in a chapter, and a couple of thousand, ideally, between about 1,500 and top end 3,000. So, I mean, that's 100%, variance, but usually aiming around the middle. But only, like I said, if this chapter feels too short, I'll merge. If it's too long, I'll often actively look for a space for a break. Partly, particularly if it hasn't got many scene breaks in. Usually chapters have scene breaks, but there are occasionally chapters that don't have any scene breaks. And the problem is that's very tiring as a reader if you're trying to read late at night. That whole one more chapter. A couple of times I've done it and then thought, oh God, I shouldn't have done this. This chapter's going on forever. And my eyes are getting heavy. Yeah. And also, although I haven't, the Aftermath is currently scheduled for audio. I've been told by people who listen to a lot of audio books that to them there is an ideal length for the chapters in the audiobook, otherwise they get tired as well. So that's quite they said if a chapter that's too long can be hard going for someone on an audiobook. Particularly because, I mean, whether you're a commuter and you've got to stop it.
Well, that's the thing, I listen to audiobooks in the car, so that's when so quite often I'll get to work and I'll have 5 minutes left and I've got to just leave it until
exactly. That's frustrating, isn't it? It's frustrating, and people don't like that. Some people listen to audiobooks because actually they need to listen to audiobooks, and for other reasons it can be quite tiring if they have to concentrate for a full 20 minutes on one chapter. Short chapters are better if you're going to go the audio route, or at the very least scene breaks. I always think scene breaks are fine because they're a natural stopping point.
You mentioned earlier just about that your other career. So did you always want to be a writer, but obviously you wanted to be a scientist as well. So how did that sort of come about?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I was always writing something. I used to pinch exercise books from school so I could write stories. I was fortunate enough with the Aftermath to actually have the book launch in the library where I learned to read as a child.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Back to the city, full circle. It was absolutely lovely. The library's has been rebuilt since then, and it's a very nice new modern building. But actually, there was a lot of people who remembered it. A lot of people from the area came. I could probably still sketch a floor plan of of the old library and tell you where everything was. And in fact, I did start describing them, and I personally worked there. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Adult fiction was down there. Blah blah blah. That's the impact it had on me. So I'd always wanted to write, and always had, and I always kept something going on the sidelines, just because it's a nice hobby and it's a good way of relieving stress, and also my head's full of ideas. Like I've got to get them down. Once you've written an idea down, it stops nagging you, which is good. So I did lots, but it wasn't until I followed the science career, but obviously I was still writing as a hobby, my downtime. And then when I retrained as a teacher, and a couple of years into that career, it was like, right, now I need a proper hobby. I need something because it's a very full-on profession, as people know, and very easy to get down a rabbit hole where you just all you think about is your next day lessons and all that. Yeah. That's not healthy at all.
No.
And even if you're forcibly not working more than 60 or 70 hours a week, you're thinking about it. I needed a proper hobby, and I thought, I've always fancied doing creative writing. So I did it I found a course at a local college, and the woman who was running it, a woman called Danielle Joando, who is now, I mean, she's written since she was quite young when I started. She was younger than me. She was only in her mid-20s, relatively fresh out of university, was running these great courses. And suddenly she's took off big time the last few years, writing young adult fiction. She's now in the national curriculum. I mean, that's brilliant. She's been showered with awards. Yeah, really impressive. But she was writing these courses, and it was just such good fun. But whilst I was doing it, sometimes the homework I would sort of put towards whatever I was writing at the time as a hobby. Yeah. And my first book wasn't police procedure in any way, shape or form, but it had elements. And when I gave up on that one, I realised the only element that I was working on was as a murder mystery, and that's what got me to write properly.
Yeah.
But yeah, always been. I've got loads of stuff in my office actually. My mum delights in finding boxes of stuff in the attic and going, there we go. When you wrote this, and thinking, yes, I ain't ever going to see the light of day. You know, that won't be one for the archive.
Do you still teach now? You teach as well as writing. So.
Well, yes. I tutor, a bit more accurate. Yeah. Since COVID, I kind of moved out of the classroom and I just do online tutoring now. So I have I do some private tutoring. I was working for the National Tutoring Programme, which was the catch-up tutoring for students who initially was impacted because they were impacted hugely by COVID. The school could buy in some tutoring to help these kids, and then it was moving a little bit more towards kids who just for whatever reason were falling behind. I did that for a while. That unfortunately ended this summer, but I now do private tutoring for a firm and also do some personal tutoring, and I like it. I mean, I in fact I've just written 2 lessons today. That's what I was doing this afternoon. It was so getting ready for some of the stuff after Christmas. Figuring maybe I'll get it done now out of the way. And there's a lot of creativity there actually. People don't realise this. You've got to. Science and teaching is all about telling stories. You've got to tell the story, and I use a lot of metaphors. I use a lot of stories in my teaching anyway. A good allegory is easy to remember. If you talk about enzymes, how they work, I have a great one which involves Father Christmas and his elves loading his sleigh, and I can cover most aspects of what they need to know in the GCSE syllabus on enzymes in that story.
Which they're going to remember.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. For a lot of kids, it works best for them. Language is good for another one as well. I break down words. Science words are usually made of a combination of Latin and Greek, and I don't know which one's which. But if you break them down, like photosynthesis, photo means light, synthesis means to make. Oh, making stuff with light. Yeah. That's obviously the chlorine, chloroplast. They've all got chlor at the front. Chlor from Greek word chloros, meaning green gas. Chloroplasts are green. Chloroplasts are filled with chlorophyll, which is the green pigment. Yeah, but the so when the kids see chloros, they think green and try and work back from there. I always say to them, look, you're never going to be examined on this.
No.
And it doesn't matter if it doesn't work for you. But if you happen to be good at languages, maybe this has helped you learn a bit better. So it's given different ways of doing stuff. Yeah. But the stories, I think, often help.
It's interesting.
So I enjoy that.
Yeah, I find it's really interesting, that sort of science and the writing together. And it's just because quite often people who are sort of scientific can be very mathematically minded and not so interested in the sort of creative side as well. So it's really interesting for that sort of.
Yeah, although back when I was doing research, you realise that you have to be very creative to be a scientist.
Yeah.
It's just we don't see it traditionally. So
no,
you'd be looking at a hypothesis and realising you've got a tremendous creativity to have synthesised that idea. I mean, the famous example is when they were doing working out the structure of DNA. Watson and Crick had all the measurements, had all the data, some of which obviously they borrowed from Rosalind Franklin without her knowing, but they had all this data. And what they did was they went to the tool shop and asked them, would you make some metal shapes based on these measurements we're going to give you. And they did. And then he sat down and they tried to put them together. And they do using cardboard, they cut out and all sorts. And there's 2 or 3 potential models which DNA could have had. And a very big scientist, Linus Pauling, had already come up with one idea. And in fact, they almost gave up because they thought, well, if Linus Pauling's done it, there's no point going on. Then they realized he'd made an error. But one of the models they put together, and it was supposedly rejected by Watson out of hand because it wasn't beautiful. And he said, well, nature's beautiful. So for this fundamental will be beautiful.
Yeah.
And so they put that model to one side. And sure enough, the DNA helix is incredibly elegant. And particularly if you're a biologist like me, it really is a thing of beauty. And that was creativity. There's no 2 ways about it. That is creativity. It was artistic creativity that got them there, along with obviously all of the science and the measurement. And to me, that's why scientists often don't get enough credit for the creativity because it's couched in the language of maths and the rules and stuff that govern us in science. You often see it as process driven, and of course it is. That's how you generate your data. That's how you get the facts. But to assemble the facts and then put together your hypothesis and your model and your conclusion, that is creativity.
I mean, it makes sense really when you think about it, that it's not just that simple. You've got to have that sort of background.
There's a lot of creativity goes in before that. We're chucking huge amounts of data at AI at the moment to do drug design and stuff like that. But the data sets they're giving to the AI have come from human work, and they are there's a creative spark in there that the AI won't have come up with. The AI will not have come up with the idea for how to do that experiment. It can't. It doesn't have that creative spark.
It needs that.
You can only do what's gone before, and that's where humans excel, is to jump. It's like generating these AI books. These AI stories are just taking the stuff that's been written before, and then using probability to work out what word comes next in the sentence.
It's just gonna be dull, isn't it?
It's a fact. I mean, it's never going to have true originality.
No,
that's the thing. The problem is it may just be good enough that people just go, oh, that's free, I'll have that. I won't buy them. That's what worries me. Is that people said that why would you go out to McDonald's when you can have a steak at home? Well, it turns out that people don't mind going out for McDonald's instead of cooking steak at home. Why would you download music onto your phone when you could just do proper in a stereo? Because the quality's not as good. Well, it's good enough though.
Maybe that's good. Like you say, good enough. I'm looking at the time and we're nearly up to the hour. What's next for you, Paul?
Well, I've got quite a few plans actually, funnily enough. So at the moment it's all a case of trying to get publishers interested and stuff. So I've got 2 more standalones that are basically they're in there. One of them I'm doing a final edit on. I'll be very happy with that. Another one needs a bit more work. But I've also got 3 in a new police procedure series. We have younger detectives, a pair of them, very different to Warren Jones, set in Coventry, because that's where I'm living now, and it's very easy for me to obviously research places as opposed to a fictional town. And again, it's just playing the publisher game at the moment. There's plenty there, and I'm writing obviously new stuff alongside that. But so potentially there's plenty more books in the work. But I've so enjoyed doing the standalone and also domestic thrillers. That's the way it's going to go. It's going to have to be. I'm going to have to do both. I can't see me being satisfied with only doing police procedures or only doing these. I'm going to have to mix it up.
You've got the bug now.
Oh yeah.
So just before we go, would you like to just give yourself a little plug of the Aftermath before we go?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So here's the Aftermath. Okay, it is available as paperback. Quite good offers at the moment. It's currently 99 pence on Kindle. So if you go search that out, that's going to be there for a few more days. And if you are also a member of your rivals, Crime Fiction Addict, I'm giving away a paperback today. You have to go into the thread today and just leave your name in the comments, and I'm drawing names out of a hat tomorrow. So plenty of opportunities to get that. My website, paulgitsham.com. There's 2 free Warren Jones short stories on there. So just help yourself download. I always think it's a nice way to see whether you like my writing. They're proper stories. There's not, and now buy so-and-so to find out. None of that nonsense. They're complete short stories with twists and red herrings and stuff. And also, particularly if you are a writer yourself or want to be a writer, my blog, which has been on hiatus for a few weeks just because I've been snowed under with GCSE marking, I do a Tuesday tip blog, and that's everything from the book industry to writing activities. If you've got to break your block, so blockbusters as I call them.
Yeah.
I've got some guest posts in there, so there's lots of stuff on there, as well as things, tips and tricks that I've just learned over the years. When you're writing long enough, you do pick up a few things, so they're on there. So paulgitsham.com, and from there you can sign up to my newsletter. You can do my my blogs, my book reviews, and obviously read a bit more about my books.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so. It's been really fascinating. I love the book.
Thank you.
It's a real page turner.
Thank you. It's very kind.
And as I said, you'll go through it thinking, I don't know who I can trust, and I'm not sure when you get to the end.
Yeah. So now I'm going to find some gaffer tape for my headphones.
Yeah, you will have to get something. Thank you everybody for joining us. We've got Winterfest coming up on Sunday. So if you look at the group, you'll be able to see all the events that we've got planned for that day. Thanks again, Paul. Good luck with the book. Good luck with the next ones. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.